I'm sitting down with Tim Macdonald, the 2014 U.S. National Scottish Fiddling Champion and a Fellow at the Newberry Library in Chicago, and his friend and co-conspirator, Jeremy Ward, who plays the bass violin. And Jeremy is a founding member of the 16th and 17th century brass and strings ensemble called Rook. Rook has performed at the Boston and Madison Early Music Fringe Festivals. So welcome, Tim and Jeremy, to WBOM Radio.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Louise.
And you're known as an historically informed Scottish fiddling duo. You both recently toured Scotland performing, teaching and jamming at concert halls, schools and pubs across the country. And you were a featured band at the 2015 Chicago Highland Games in Itasca, and going to be there again, I believe. Currently, you both regularly perform at folk dances and other events in Chicago, including at the Duke of Perth pub. And we will hear some of your music in just a moment. But first, I'd like you to tell us about the instruments you play. And Tim?
Right, well, I play the Scottish fiddle, which is the exact same thing as a violin. It's the same piece of wood, it's just the style that you play it that distinguishes whether it's called a fiddle or a violin. Since we play historically informed music, we're using historic instruments. So the violin actually evolved over the past few centuries. And the way mine is set up is how it would have been set up in the 18th century. So with gut strings instead of metal strings, and some of the wood fittings are different. So the bow you use is a different shape, and all of this gives it a much different sound, which is what we're aiming for.
And Jeremy?
Yeah, I play the predecessor to the modern cello, which is the bass violin. And main difference is it's a little bit larger, a little bit bassier, and it was developed as the bass member of the violin family. And so it got started in the 16th century, and then the cello took over around the 18th century. And it has a lot of the similar differences that the violin from today has with the early violin. And all of those differences are emblematic of a difference in priority of what we want to do with the sound in terms of the articulations, in terms of the tone, being a little more vocal and organic with the gut strings rather than the metal strings, which are designed to resonate longer.
So let's start the music with some Scottish jigs. I had a wife on my ain, Dungheld House, and my wife's a wanton wee thing. Tim, as the current Arthur and Lila Weinberg Fellow at the Newbury Library, you're researching the period-correct performance of Scottish Baroque music, which you and Jeremy are so well known for playing in the many various venues in the area and actually internationally. So why did you decide to focus on period-correct performances of Scottish Baroque?
When I started just playing sort of the modern, traditional Scottish fiddling, but I was always sort of wondering where that came from and wanting to learn more about the art. And this led me to reading these academic doctoral dissertations and these other works about the history of Scottish fiddling. And it was very interesting to me. And I found people who played in that style and on that period of instrument. And it's a very different sound from what's done nowadays, and it was just very attractive to me, and it's been fascinating to me both to explore it by playing and to explore it in the library through research.
Jeremy, you were also chosen to participate in Carnegie Hall's professional training workshop. Also, can you tell us about your 2014 residency at Oberlin College Conservatory of Music and the album the group released titled 11?
Sure. Rook has been going for about 4 years now, and so we really market ourselves as a group that does a unique combination of winds and stringed instruments, which is made possible by the early instruments we play. So when we go down to Oberlin, and later this year we're going to be going out to Dordt College, we're presenting this music that is largely neglected, and we're presenting ways of performing it that is fairly unique on the early music scene. And so our album that we put out last year, 11, is a good compilation of what we do, whether it's 16th century polyphony or 17th century Stilus Fantasticus work. It's kind of a broad range of styles that would have incorporated winds and brass and stringed instruments back in that day in ways that we just don't hear today.
Well, now let's hear one of Tim's compositions titled Farewell to the Unicorn. And how did you come up with that title, Tim?
Many of these Scottish tunes sort of have a history lesson embedded in them. And this one's no different. It's actually about the Scottish colonization of Panama, which took place in the 1690s. And it was called the Darien Scheme, and it was this enormous undertaking where they gathered up 1/3 of the circulating capital in Scotland to outfit this expedition to go to Panama. And the assumption was that this was Scotland's chance to prove itself as its own independent country, on the level of England. And unfortunately, everything about the trip that could go wrong went wrong, and 5 ships went out, and then they were afflicted by disease and by poor planning and by difficulties at the venue they chose for the colony, and there was aggression from the natives, and there was aggression from the Spaniards, and there was a sort of schism within the group between the military and the civilians, and eventually they decided to abandon the site and to just return back to Scotland with their tails between their legs. And of the 5 ships that went out, only 2 could return. One was called the Caledonia, and one was called the Unicorn, which is Scotland's national animal. And as they were sailing back to Scotland, they made it as far as New Jersey, and then they realized that the crew was dying so quickly they wouldn't be able to man 2 ships going across the Atlantic, and so they had to combine the crews onto one ship and then abandon the second ship, the Unicorn, on the shores of New Jersey. I was just very struck by this image of sort of Scotland's dream of an independent nation ending with this abandoned ship on the shores of New Jersey. So I wrote this tune to commemorate that.
Tim, you've mentioned that fiddle music tends to straddle worlds, and of course straddles centuries. Having been born in Honduras to parents who were missionaries, and you now live in the United States, so you've seen a lot of the world, and of course play internationally, I was wondering, did anything in your childhood influence your love of music, perhaps a gift or a person you met?
When I was very young, I was a very hyperactive child. Just could not sit still for long periods of time. My mother took me to see the local orchestra play once, and I was too young to remember it, but apparently I was completely restless before the concert, and then as soon as bows touched strings and the music started, I was motionless for the 45-minute segment. And then as soon as the music stopped back up and it was intermission, then I was back to caterwauling. And I went home that day and said, "Mom, what was that?" And she said it was a violin. And I said, "Oh, well, I want to learn how to do that." And I was too young at the time to start. I think I was 2 or 3. Then right before I turned 4, I was still very adamant about violins. And under the Christmas tree was this minuscule violin. And so I got that for Christmas, and I started lessons right then when I had just turned 4, and I've been playing ever since.
And Jeremy, what was your biggest influence in your choice of a musical career?
Well, I also started very young with the interest in it. I started when I was 2 and saw Yo-Yo Ma on Sesame Street. and he played something, and my parents informed me that I told them I want to play that. And them not knowing that there were small cellos, when I was 4, they started me on the violin. And for 3 years, I suffered through that and protested that I wanted to play the cello until I was 7. And a cello teacher came into the area, and they got me a smaller cello, and I went from there.
Well, now let's hear a set of stress bass and reels by William Marshall. What are those titles going to be?
It's a set of 4 tunes by William Marshall, who's a second half of the 18th century Scottish composer. The first tune is a strathspey called Craiganacky Bridge, which celebrates the opening of that bridge, which dramatically reduced William Marshall's commute to his work. So he was very excited about that. And the next 3 tunes are Rions, which is a faster type of dance form. The first is Miss Jane McInnes of Dandelieth, followed by Lord John Scott, and then Arthur's Seat.
When you both went to Scotland last year, you competed in the Glenfiddich Fiddle Championship. Tell us how you both did and how you came to be selected for that competition.
Well, we're invited because I won the previous year's national U.S. Scottish Fiddling Championship. Not always, but usually if you win the American Nationals, then the Glenfiddich will invite you. And it's an invitation-only competition in Scotland for who they consider the best 8 fiddlers in the world under the age of 35 or so. So anyway, that's how I earned the invitation, and I was allowed to bring an accompanist with me, and of course Jeremy was my first choice, and I was thrilled that we were able to go together. And we played well. We didn't win this time, but we're coming back this coming year in October to try again.
But I bet they had their feet tapping when you played.
They did.
And they're not supposed to in the competition.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a big sign with no foot tapping. But actually, we very audibly heard the audience response to the music that we were presenting there. And it was exciting to be a part of a group of people that were that responsive to the music.
And did you sample any haggis in Scotland?
Yes, we did.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That was my first time with haggis, and it was very good.
I've been told you can find haggis in some unusual foods.
Yes, I had a 21st century innovation, which was the haggis burger, which is a cheeseburger with a nice disc of haggis on top of the patty.
Well, besides winning the U.S. National Championship, Tim, you've also won first place in 2 national composition competitions recently. And do you spend a lot of time, or do your competitions come suddenly out of the blue? Or what inspires you when you write your music?
I compose for many reasons. Sometimes something happens and I just feel like I have something to say about that musically, and that makes me write a tune. Or sometimes a really good title pops into my head, and then I feel like there needs to be a tune to match the title. Or sometimes it's a lot more pragmatic, and I'll be playing for a dance, or I'll be about to meet a friend or something, and it just seems like it'd be good to have a new tune for that occasion. I've been known to write 10 tunes in a day, and I've been known to go a month between compositions. It just depends.
So now here is Tim Macdonald and Jeremy Ward playing selections from some of Tim's own compositions. And what are those called?
So this is 3 tunes, and the first is a jig called Poo Sticks at the Causeway, followed by 2 rions, Blueberry Pie and Kimera Hershiv. That last title is in Scottish Gaelic, the language of the Highlands. It's sort of a joke because I've been trying to learn Gaelic, but it's a very difficult language. And so this is an important phrase to know when you're learning Gaelic. Kimera Hershiv literally means, how do you say such and such?
That's a very important phrase. So Tim and Jeremy, you have been known to, as they say, bring down the house when you play for Scottish and English dances and balls. So you must enjoy playing for enthusiastic audiences and seeing the dancers swirling around in dizzying circles, wearing colorful costumes and moving to your music. What does that feel like?
It feels very much like you're finally seeing what music is supposed to do. Music is motion, and so when you see people actually moving to your music, you feel like you've hit the terminus of what music is supposed to be.
But I know you've also been known to change the beat at a moment's notice just to keep the dancers on their toes, so to speak. And so that must add to the fun of playing.
Well, yeah, absolutely. You know, you don't want to get stuck in the rut with how the tunes are going. We think it's great to keep the dancers entertained and always listening for what the music is going to do next.
So is there a favorite tune you like to include in your performances?
We have a few chestnuts that, you know, would always get a good response from the audience. You know, a few favorite reels and jigs.
One of them that we tend to pull out whenever we need something that's going to be really high energy is the old tune, The High Road to Linton. It just usually excites the whole mood. And then there's another tune that is basically a joke now to us that we like to put in our performances just because it highlights the weirdness of some of the earlier writing and our modern approach to it, called Johnny's Friends Are Ne'er Pleased.
So does modern music such as heavy metal or alternative hard rock sound good using the type of instruments you play? The Smashing Pumpkins, for instance, use stringed instruments in some of their music.
Well, the Baroque instruments with the gut strings and the different bows and everything, the big trade-off with them is that you lose consistency of tone and power of tone and volume of tone in exchange for a much more nuanced control over exactly how you're shaping the notes and the spaces between the notes. So for a full volume sort of death metal, maybe the gut strings aren't the best choice. But I do listen to metal sometimes, and I listen to a lot of jazz. Dave Brubeck and Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie and all that crowd. And it's not that I try to play their tunes or to directly imitate their style, but I'm very, very inspired sort of at a higher level by some of their innovations and some of their ability to create this new music based on their own standards that's so engaging and so wonderful to listen to. So when I play, and especially when I compose, sometimes I drop hints about them.
And actually, I come at it from a little bit of a different perspective. I don't know that it would be successful to play to an audience of metal fans on these instruments, but on the other hand, in my playing, I've definitely been compared to metal or Jimi Hendrix or any of the people working with electric instruments. And I think part of what the gut strings do is create a raw character to the sound that you can even get distortion on if you want to. So depending on how you use the tools, there is an element of electricity in it even without having the amplification in it.
One of the favorite pieces of feedback I received from one of the judges when I won the national competition was after the results were announced and everything, I went up to him, because usually the judges have something more to say apart from the sheets they put out. So I said, "Well, hello, sir. Thanks so much for judging. What did you think?" And he said, "Dude, that was awesome. That was avant-garde. I don't think it was traditional, but that was hot, man. Like, I'm into it." And I said, "Well,
Good.
that's wonderful." And it's very research-based, you know, it's how I think it sounded in the 18th century. And he said, "Well, that's so old, it's new again, you know. Keep it up, man." So I think it's terrific that people were the same then as now, and they want these intense experiences and this high-energy music. And even if the precise details of the instrumentation or the rhetoric or whatever changes, that bass drive still survives.
Speaking of being up high, I understand you were also once a fiddler on a roof of a bus. Is that a true, or is that a legend of the music world?
Many years ago, I was playing at a folk festival, and this man came up to me and he said, "You're playing very nicely." And I said, "Thank you." And he said, "Would you like to make twice what you're making right now playing if you just come and play with me down the street?" And I said, "Well, maybe. What's involved?" And he said, "Well, I run this ice cream truck, and I thought it'd be terrific if you just sat on the roof of the ice cream truck and played tunes."
And did you?
I did. It was a lot of fun.
Well, now we're going to change the mood a little bit and get into more of a lilting tune. And Tim and Germany will play the Highland Watch. Jeremy, you're a guest lecturer at Wheaton College. What do you teach?
I teach historical performance practice there.
And Tim, you also teach?
I'm on faculty at a Scottish fiddle camp. It's actually where Jeremy and I first played together. It was at this camp in North Carolina called the Jinkendidln School of Scottish Fiddling. It's an unusual name for an excellent camp. So I teach there every summer, and I also have a private studio in Chicago.
Do you have some advice for young musicians just starting out on their musical adventures?
I think it's important to keep perspective when you're learning an instrument because, sort of on one end, it is a lot of work to practice every day and to go to these lessons and to play in these groups. And I'd be lying if I said it wasn't just a lot of manual effort to develop your skill in the instrument. So you need to be ready for that, but at the same time, it's too easy to feel the drudgery. And I think it's important that people realize that they're making music and they're making art and look for opportunities to play for people and to brighten the day of someone that hears that music, and they look for styles of music that are especially meaningful to them, and that they are interested in developing. So just to have sort of the sense of perspective about recognizing the work that goes into music, but also having your sights firmly set on all the rewards inherent in music.
Yeah, and I think along with that, to realize that music is very much a social activity. And so it's easy when you are by yourself practicing to just make that all that you're doing. And so finding opportunities to collaborate, even at the very beginning levels, to make music with other people is very important. And that's how my whole career has happened, is finding people who are interested in the same music as I am and just jamming and making music together.
And now here is a tune called There'll Ne'er Be Peace Till Jamie Comes Hame. Tim Macdonald and Jeremy Ward, thank you so much for sharing your musical genius with us. And what will you close with?
We'll be playing what's called an MSR, and that's short for March, Strathspey, and Reel. And this is sort of the foundation for the modern competition scene, both on fiddle and on bagpipes. It's expected to play in MSR. So we competed with this last year at the Glenfiddich, and I've competed with it at Nationals. And the 3 tunes are called Hey Johnny Cope, Lady Dalrymple of North Berwick's Strathspey, and Green Grow the Rashers O.
I'm Louise Brass with Tim Macdonald and Jeremy Ward on WBOM.